All right, well, it's never an easy conversation to have or hear, but the phrase "we're going to have to let you go" is more likely to be uttered more and more in the coming months in the corporate world, particularly as we hit a recession. But is the process as simple as this? And what do individuals and companies need to be mindful of during this delicate process? Well, let's bring in Joydeep. He is CEO at People and Culture Strategies. Joins us now. Joydeep, pleasure to have you. First up, obviously, has there been an increase in the amount of redundancies? I mean, just looking at the headlines, it seems to be across the board in all industries.
Yeah, there definitely has been a spike. We've noticed that over the last 4 to 6 weeks, that what we're seeing is that the appetite for, or the feeling amongst our client base around the need to restructure and put in place the measures that are geared towards protecting businesses, notwithstanding the JobKeeper scheme, has really increased. And we're seeing that organisations are probably going deeper in anticipation of there being prolonged uncertainty than what might have been thought to have happened a couple of months ago.
We've seen the laws changing now, Joydeep, or at least the identification that leave has been accruing during this period where a lot of people haven't actually been at the workplace. Do you think this type of realisation might actually lead to more redundancies coming to pass on the back of the fact that employers realise they've got an extra liability sitting on their books?
I think the decision for any employer around whether you're going to be letting people go, first and foremost, is going to be based on what is your projection for your business's viability and profitability over a period of time in the future. Now, there's support that's been provided through the government. There may have been some organisations that have been able to withstand the storm better than others. But when you are finding, to your point, that there are additional costs that you might have been hoping that would not have necessarily been accruing at this particular point in time, or other circumstances that are just contributing to that pain, what that does in the mind of a business owner or a group of leaders within a business is to say, look, it's just starting to become too hard. We don't really have the certainty to say we're going to keep all of these people on. Let's make that decision now. It's unpleasant, but let's do it now rather than waiting for things to get really, really bad. And at that point, we may not even have a business to be letting people on. So that's the thinking.
Is there delicacies, I guess, you think of Victoria going into lockdown again, people who have, child rearing responsibilities at home, things that they have to be doing. I mean, is there delicacies in terms of letting go of employees in moments like this? How do you play that from an employer and an employee angle?
Yeah, so one of the things that I would say, based on the last couple of weeks in particular, is that a lot of employers are taking more shortcuts than what would have ordinarily been the case when it comes to implementing redundancies. And what they are doing in that space is, I think, very much affected by this assumption, and we've talked in previous discussions around the dangers of employers making assumptions that just because everyone knows that we're in a pandemic, that should mean that everyone understands that our business is under pressure and therefore it's obvious that we have to let people go. It's not that obvious. When you are letting an employee go, you are dealing with that person's livelihood. That person themselves also has to live through a pandemic and has an extraordinary amount of challenges, in all likelihood, around securing work at all, let alone probably at a comparable level of income. So employers actually, and this might seem counterintuitive, need to be affecting these processes in a more diligent and thorough and compassionate way than they would have been previously, because the actual overall circumstances, recession and pandemic combined, make it a lot worse for the people who are going to be impacted by it. And this is a real watch out. I think a lot of employers are saying everyone should just know redundancies are happening everywhere, therefore it should come as no surprise that we're letting people go. It doesn't quite work like that. Yeah, so the definition of redundancy is an employer no longer wishes a position to be performed by a person at all. So an organisation needs to look very carefully at what is the role that's being performed by someone. Is it just a short-term thing that you don't need it to be done for a couple of weeks or a couple of months? Or is this something that's permanent? And this is where employers are going to get it wrong. And on the flip side, employees are understandably going to have an awareness of that themselves. They're going to say, well, look, it might be that I might not be needed for the next couple of weeks or months, but surely you can wait another period of time, say 6 months or so, to see whether you really need to let me go. And these are the kinds of discussions that employers need to be having, and a lot of thinking that needs to underpin them.
Do you see a situation occurring, Joydeep, where the legal system is overwhelmed by small civil cases? If there are firms that aren't willing to make good on their legal redundancy payouts, do you think in the cash difficulties we're seeing, that's more likely to occur now?
I think we've already started to see a spike in claims, and that sort of does go against the grain a little bit of, I think, what really should be happening. But again, it just goes back to that same point that this is intensely personal for an employee. Whatever might be the business underpinnings and justifications for letting someone go, ultimately losing your job may put you in a position where you've got no choice but to have that fight. And that's why we are seeing that spike in claims. And I think that's going to continue in upcoming months.
Sensitive time for everyone, that's for sure. Joydeep, appreciate your time on the program. We'll look forward to chatting with you next week.